Okay, so the number one thing that people talk about when they're learning how to swim, or I ask them how they feel about swimming, they always say it's great until it's time to take a breath. And we don't think about breathing until we can't. Hi folks, it's Celeste from Triathlon Skills, Simple Swims, and I'm here to share with you part 5 of my breathing series. So I'm going to share with you 8 tips to get to that final point where you're taking a sip of air. And like anything, it takes practice, ongoing and sometimes tedious, kind of boring practice to get to that point where you can breathe easily and enjoy your swim completely. Okay, first off is just a reminder. This is 3 strokes and then rolling up for 3 breaths. So this elimination process. So the key things are going to be tilting onto the side when you roll up, crossing that arm over, and taking your time to get those 3 breaths, working on keeping the head low and the hips high, so that when it's time to get down to that sip, that you're already ready. So you're taking those 3 breaths just to kind of set yourself up for success. And of course, some body position is really important. And you make the length of the 3 strokes, 3 breaths. Down you go, and you get to the other side, then you come back. You eliminate the duration of the pause by taking 3 strokes and then 2 breaths. Everything setting up, crossing the hand over, keeping that arm low. And then getting down to this 3 strokes and taking 1 breath. So there's a slight difference between taking the 3 strokes and the 1 breath versus the sip. They're very close, but you're rolling almost all the way onto your back here, and you're getting both eyes out of the water. So there's a lot more turning in this 1 breath than there is when taking the sip. So you're going the whole length, practicing that 1 breath. And now to graduate down to the 1 little sip here, the first thing is you're not going to be turning your hips as far. So the belly is going to stay closer to pointing down towards the floor than up towards the ceiling. Now the same thing, the hips are not turning as far. The head is not going to turn as far. You're going to be looking sideways. So 1 goggle in, 1 goggle out. So that's your first tip, is not turning the hips as far and not turning the head as far. So I'm a big fan of practicing the strokes on the land. So you can practice in the water and then also take some time, practice on the land. So as this left hand goes in, the hips turn. They're not turning nearly as far, more like 45-degree tilt of the hips and the shoulders. And your head is following when the hips turn. Now the head is going sideways. And so you're slicing the face with the surface of the water. So you have 1 goggle in, 1 goggle out. You're keeping a nice horizontal line. Now as that right hand comes through, finishing the recovery, then the hips roll and the head follow back down into the water. So again, the left hand goes in, the hips turn. You're looking sideways to get that little sip of air, keeping a nice horizontal body line. Now, also when you're practicing on the floor and shooting a little video of yourself, it can be really helpful to take that camera to the front view so you can see the angle of the tilt of the hips and the shoulders. So they're moving through the hips, the shoulders are following the hips, and you're allowing that head to just make that little turn when it's time to take that breath of air. It's a good visual for yourself. Get down on the floor and practice how far those hips and head are going to turn. So back in the water, your second tip is to be sure that you're exhaling while your face is in the water, and especially any air that needs to come out just as you're rolling up, so you're ready for that quick sip of air. So when it comes to breathing, as we're going through this process of getting down to the sip, usually the number one thing that people are not doing when they're struggling with the breath is not exhaling. And the feeling is, oh, I have to inhale more, when usually the bigger problem is exhaling out slowly and gently. And then, as I was suggesting, is make sure all of it's out just at that point of rolling up for air. So making sure that that little chamber called your lungs is empty enough to be able to take that sip of air in. And if you're not empty enough, as you go down the pool and every time you take a breath, all you're doing is just building up more and more pressure, and then it's like you explode and you have to stop and you can't. So the real important tip is to make sure that you're exhaling sufficiently under the water so that you have that little window of time to take that sip of air in and then continue on. Okay, so tip number 3 is move the jaw to the left, make a little pocket, and just take a tiny sip of air. So you don't need a big gulp, you don't want a big opening, just a little sip, moving the jaw to the side. Allow that air in. Any water that gets in the mouth, just spit it back out. This is a good one to practice on the floor. So in this case, breathing to the right, the jaw is moving to the right to get that little opening in the corner of the mouth. You don't want a big opening. And again, you just want a little inhale, and that's it. Okay, tip number 4 is very counterintuitive, but you actually need to lean the top of your head down into the water to create a bow wave to get this little pocket. You can see how the water is higher than the jawline here. That's the bow wave. You want to take a breath into that bow wave. So again, it's very counterintuitive to think about leaning the top of your head into the water in order to take a breath. But just imagine you want to get the top of the head down so you can get your jaw higher and create that bow wave. So use the top of your head to act like a little plow through the water to open up that spot where you can just get that nice sip of air. So with tip number 4, you may have to exaggerate, getting your head lower than the chin. And you don't want to think about climbing out of the water, but as you turn your torso, as you turn those hips and the head follows, you really just want a little bit of your face out of the water. You don't want the top of the head out of the water. That's the part that doesn't breathe. You want your mouth out of the water. Okay, so lean in, get the top down to get that chin a little bit higher. Number 5 is very similar to number 4, but you're going to consciously practice slicing your face with the water, keeping one goggle in and one goggle out. So starting to notice that you can see under the water and above water at the same time, and that you're looking directly sideways. Now, this is a good one to practice standing. However, when you're standing, there's no bow wave, and it's a little more challenging. Good opportunity to get some water up your nose, but make sure that you're exhaling out and noticing that you're practicing tilting that head down. So keep that head tilted down, noticing that you're slicing your face with the surface of the water and creating that nice bow wave to get that sip. Now, tip number 6, when you're swimming, regardless of whether or not you're breathing, there is a nice synchronicity with the hand entering the catch and the hips. So when it's time to take that sip, you're just going to add that turn of the head along with the hand slicing in, the hips turning, and the head coming up with the hips, and then the head going back down with that recovery arm. So slowing it down, left hand is forward, right hip is high, right hand is high. As the hip drops down, the head starting to come up with the hip, that right arm going forward, that left hand pressing back. Now as the left hand drops in, the left hip drops and the head's following back in. So everything is synchronized when you're swimming, and so the breath is just allowing the head to follow the rest of those movements. Guessed it, my favorite thing to do is to get down on the floor and practice that. Just kind of use the toes to turn and play with that synchronicity of the movements of your body. So tip number 7, as you're going into taking that breath, think about the arms lengthening as far forward and as far back as you can get. So really extend that right arm forward, squeeze that left hand all the way down the thigh as you corkscrew the whole body up for that air. So you're rolling up for air, you're keeping the length in the stroke, you're not pressing down on that lead arm to try to lift the head out of the water, but you're going to surf that lead arm forward as you roll up to take that breath of air, and keep the stroke nice and long to give yourself lots of time to take that breath. So use that opportunity to lengthen the stroke and surf to make that breath much easier. So tip number 8 is make sure that you're keeping a nice low and wide recovery arm. So right here, when you take that breath, do not pull that right shoulder behind you or pull that elbow behind you, but you want to keep that arm low and wide. So when you are practicing 3 strokes, 3 breaths, and I had you cross that arm over, it's to help give you that sense of keeping the arm kind of out and away from the torso. And that's really important. So you don't want to be lifting that arm up, because when something goes up, something else is going to go down. And right when you're ready to take that breath, if you lift that arm up, you might find yourself sinking in the water. So make sure you keep that arm low and wide. Common mistakes are lifting the head up, pulling the arm behind you, opening up the mouth too big, and kind of climbing up out of the water. Or lifting that recovery arm really high up and pulling that shoulder back. So you want to stay low and wide, pressing the head in. So whether you're breathing or not, take that recovery arm nice and wide, that triangle shape, and just barely clearing the fingertips out of the water. So as you're practicing, if you are dragging the fingertips through the water, just try to go wider instead of higher. So you don't have to lift the arm up higher, but allow that angle from the elbow to the fingertips to go wider to clear the water. So to take that sip of air, you want to make sure that you're exhaling in the water. So you're blowing up bubbles, whether it's out your mouth or out your nose. So you want to be empty so that when you turn your head and get yourself into position, you're ready to just take a sip of air. It's a little inhale and then not a giant gulp. And you need to move your jaw to the side to get that sip of air. You want the air to go in, but you don't want the water to go in. That said, when I'm swimming, I really never fully close my mouth. My mouth is usually hanging open. It's very relaxed. I exhale out my nose or out my mouth. I turn my head, I move the jaw to the side. I get that sip of air, and oftentimes I get a little bit of water in my cheek, but because of the head position, a little bit of sip, I'm able to then turn my head and let that little bit of water that might have gotten in there come back out, so I'm not swallowing water. You want to make sure that you're not opening a big mouth, you don't want to make a big hole to take in a lot of water. You just want a little space to get that sip of air. Okay. Now that you've practiced the sip, go back and start the whole process over again. So 3 strokes, 3 breaths, 3 strokes, 2 breaths, 3 strokes, 1 breath, and then 3 strokes and that sip of air. And keep practicing this cycle of 4 lengths of the pool as you keep refining that 3 strokes and that sip of air. And sometimes if you're going down the pool and that sip just didn't happen, feel free to roll onto your back and reset yourself so that you can relax again and continue on practicing that sip. And then keep going back 3 strokes, 3 breath sequence so that you're swimming 100 yards at a time. So this is part 5. Make sure you go back and review all the earlier videos that I've created, and getting down to this point of the 3 strokes and the 3 breaths and taking that sip, and then go back and practice again. When you're at the pool, have some faith, write down the 8 tips, whatever you need to do to bring those to the pool to keep you in sync with what's going on. And make sure that you pick one of those tips as you cross the pool that you're going to practice and that you're going to dial in on, because there's a lot of information. There's lots to do here. It is challenging, but you've got to keep practicing, and you will get there, okay? If you like the video, make sure you hit that like button or subscribe. Also, pick up a copy of my book, Simple Swims, Practices for Balanced, Stable Swimming. Lots of great practices and information in there. All right, stay tuned for more content to come. Ciao for now.